Hello, doing something different today. I feel like I say that a lot. I am frequently trying to do something different, which coincidentally is kind of the topic of today's video. I want to talk to you about the most recent Devolver Digital marketing showcase thing that was released as part of the ongoing, not really E3, but still kind of the basic premise of E3, which is a time of the year, usually in June, when all of the major video game platform holders, publishers, studios do a whole bunch of marketing right in your face. It's been normalized. It used to be just a press conference thing, and then it got opened up to the public, and now the general public, and especially like the hardcore gaming community, just expects a bunch of marketing and reveals and announcements around this time of year. And honestly, if I was being more cynical about the whole thing, I would say it feels kind of skeezy, like people getting excited about watching ads is like depressing to me in concept. But then on the other hand, it's kind of just a win-win. Like ultimately, people want to hear about whether, there are new games coming out that they're interested in, whether games that they're already excited about are coming out soon. They want to hear the new announcements. They want to get a better look at a bunch of indie games. Like, it is a big opportunity both for game developers, publishers, players, etc. Nobody has to sit down and watch the live streams and the ads and trailers, etc. But a lot of us do. I do, which is maybe the most shocking part. It feels like an event. It feels like a holiday almost, in a weird way. And I do get excited. I get excited to hear about things that I'm interested in, basically. And back in 2017, this video game publisher called Devolver Digital released a pre-recorded press conference, quote unquote, that was a straight parody of what were at the time very common types of presentations given by the massive, multi-billion video game platform holders. They used to do these massive stage shows and say, here's all the stuff we got. We've probably sunk millions of dollars just into this presentation alone. It's a huge fat deal. And so Devolver, kind of establishing their voice in the indie space specifically, said, no, we're just going to make fun of that, basically. We're going to poke fun at some really negative aspects of the video game industry as a whole, and we're also going to do that by faking our own big giant presentation with use of stock footage and some, goofy special effects and stuff like that. That first big presentation, it was really successful, I think, at least in sort of the more hardcore gaming community. It was addressing a lot of stuff that actual game players cared about, stuff that got under their skin, and that, the platform holders, the big giant companies, never really addressed. Long story short, Devolver has continued to do these intentionally subversive presentations around E3 time, along with all the other big companies, since 2017, and we just got the most recent one at the time of recording a few days ago here in 2022. So that is 6 total presentations. I don't think they've ever skipped a year. They even had one in 2020. 6 presentations in this style. They've tried to develop this continuing wacky narrative with the character of Nina Struthers, and it's very meta, and this is Devolver Digital. They include people who I'm pretty sure are just employees of the company, as well as actors. They work with a production studio to do some pretty flashy stuff. They've continued with the special effects. They keep trying to up the ante, essentially. They keep trying to do flashier, crazier stuff each year, despite the fact that the writing, the sense of humor has remained incredibly consistent. Now, I haven't checked the credits for every single year, but certainly back in 2017, the most recent one as well. This stuff was all written by one dude whose name is Don Thacker, definitely a Devolver employee, and as far as I know, he's a marketing dude. That's his job. And if you're not familiar with video game publishers and what those companies do in general, they essentially function as a third-party company that will market and distribute certain games that they have picked up. So they'll make agreements with game devs for work that they think will be really successful, and then they will do the legwork of marketing it, helping it get into different storefronts. Similar to a film distribution company, and how sometimes they'll work with indie filmmakers, where the filmmakers on their own probably wouldn't be able to do all their marketing themselves, or wouldn't be able to afford it, wouldn't know how to do that, so you go to the specialist company that handles all of that. That is more or less what video game publishers do. I definitely think that initial press conference thing, that parody back in 2017, just made so much sense. At the time, it was very savvy marketing. It was looking at what was already there. It was looking at the precedent, everyone's general expectations for these kinds of shows, and guess what? It subverted those expectations. Now, subverting expectations has become a meme. I'll return to that in just a second because that's sort of the ultimate point of this video, is the value of subversion as opposed to meeting expectations. But real quick, I want to just talk about the most recent Devolver press conference marketing showcase. Here's the thing. As I already touched on, myself and plenty of other people really enjoyed that video, that parody, that original showcase back in 2017 because it actually was fresh. It was doing something different. It set Devolver apart from a lot of other indie publishers at the time. It made them just much more well-known in general. There are really only a handful of game publishers whose names are even familiar to a lot of gamers. It's a behind-the-scenes thing, but Devolver brought it to the forefront, and they said, here we are, we have a very strong brand identity, our games reflect that, solid marketing, they know who their audience is, they're speaking directly to that audience. Yeah, we know what they're about in a general sense. As the years have gone on, and my god, 6 years of this? That certainly makes me feel old, but ooh, ever since that first one, it really has started to get long in the tooth, and I think other people have really started commenting on this. I think a lot of us are starting to feel that way about it. So what specifically is starting to feel old or kind of samey about these presentations? Well, for me, just on like the surface level, the smaller details, the style of writing has remained basically identical through all of these. I guess we could attribute that to being written by just one guy who has this particular style, that he's into the groove there and hasn't stepped out of it. Especially in the early years, I did find it very funny. Some of the writing is very clever, almost too clever at times. It sort of reminds me of some of the writing, some of the dialogue from like Archer, for example, where sometimes a joke or a bit of wordplay might be a little bit too much to actually catch in the moment, and it's so dense and so quickly delivered that it just feels like, but here, I'm sorry, like it's definitely not on that level. It is good in relation to just marketing copy, but it can come across as try-hard at times, I think. It can also do a weird thing where it just blurs a lot of the characters together because basically every single character speaks in the same style, like the dialogue is the same style, and it's just the performer's delivery, the performances that actually separate the characters in any real way. So that's one thing that has really started to get on my nerves more and more. The insane plot lines and the special effects, I actually think that like the production value they sink into these kind of works against the overall tone because it makes it feel like these things are taking themselves extremely seriously. That doesn't quite fit for me. I almost want it to feel more ramshackle and like just a couple people threw it together. All of this, it sounds like criticism I would have of an actual TV show or movie, and you're like, why would you, this is marketing, why critique it in that way? Well, because Devolver has set these presentations on a pedestal. Like they've set up expectations again. They've set up expectations for their particular style of subversion, and it doesn't feel like it matches anymore. And on top of that, that first one was subversive. The other ones have remained incredibly samey. Like they feel very similar to each other, no matter what kind of wacky special effects or gimmick or camera moves they do. And it started to feel very lame. Sometimes I think these productions and notes of style can even get in the way of just communicating or even delivering dialogue. I think it was the one last year, Max Pass Plus, whatever, where they have this long, like I assume steady cam shot where they, it's a oneer, and then they go to have different people speak directly to camera, and then they'll swap out and now it's someone else. But again, all speaking with the exact same dialogue style, and the way that the sound was recorded, it was kind of difficult to hear what they were actually saying stacked on top of the convoluted dialogue. So in other words, these things are really starting to feel similar to each other, which I'm not a fan of, and also that similar style that it keeps achieving, I don't think is really all that great. Like I don't think it's good enough to support 6 years worth of content in the exact same feel and tone, and yeah, it does kind of come across as try hard, at least to me. This is not to say that Devolver as a company is going down the tubes. Like they're still very successful. Apparently they're publicly traded, which is, does that feel weird to anybody else. And this is another weird, aspect of the most recent show in particular, is it was a 25-minute presentation thing. They talked about 5 games total. So it felt weird. It really felt like the show itself had taken over when compared to the games, which is the ultimate point. The point of them being a publisher is to, promote games that they will release and that we will play. I'm not saying that they're no longer picking good games. This is purely from the perspective of someone looking at a company that really widened its audience by a massive degree through this subversive marketing. And they have since ceased to subvert anything. And I think this leads into a much larger discussion of the value of subversion, the intentions behind subversion when you're making anything, whether it's a piece of art, something more cynical like marketing, whatever. The other side of the seesaw, of the teeter-totter, is meeting expectations. Now, if you've been on the internet for a while and you engage with especially movie, film criticism stuff, game criticism, you'll know about the whole thing surrounding The Last Jedi, the Star Wars movie. I guess at some point it came directly from Rian Johnson's mouth, this idea of wanting to subvert expectations with his movie. When a massive portion of the Star Wars fan base decided to just have the ugliest, angriest reaction to that movie overall, that phrase kind of became the center of it. For a lot of people, that represented their overall disappointment with the movie is, why would you try to subvert expectations? What's the point? Is that just art for art's sake? Are you trying to be a fancy boy when you could have just given us a good movie? Blah, 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 blah. Now, just in a lot of internet discussions about almost anything, you'll come across this phrase, subverting expectations. And sometimes it's used in a positive light. A lot of times it's used in a negative light. It's used as a way to disparage a work. Personally, I'm almost always in favor of subverting expectations just for the sake of subverting expectations. You're going to disappoint some people who were expecting one thing and got another? I'm sorry, there are worse things in the world, and in particular, if an artist of some kind feels that they want to explore something new, feels that they want to do something different, regardless of whether or not it'll actually work out in terms of commercial and critical success, I'm on board. That's just my thing. But then again, my overall viewpoint on this stuff, and even my channel in general, are not really about commercial or critical success. I don't really have a lot of mainstream appeal, I don't think, and I personally really enjoy just trying different things to see whether other people like them and to see whether I enjoy aspects of doing new things. This is also something that's come up in my past discussions on form and content. And to summarize that video, because I know most people haven't watched it, I feel that sticking to the old ways when making some kind of art, in particular old structures and standards of any kind, can really get in the way of doing something new. And personally, newness is something that I highly value. I probably value it more than just base level enjoyment of a thing. If I see something new happening, it's automatically really exciting to me. Bringing it back to Devolver, they did do something new. They subverted expectations in 2017. It led to success. People appreciated that. They got something different. They were hearing things they wanted to hear that no one else was saying. Again, it set the brand apart with their own distinct identity. It worked really well. And since then, basically no subversion. And we've gotten to the point here in 2022 where I feel like it's just run its course. Now, the way that they ended this short and the whole ongoing storyline thing, which I never really cared about, there is potential they're just trying to reset. This particular guy, good old Don, maybe he realizes this as well, and maybe he's like, okay, the thing people liked was the newness. Maybe we need to get back to that. Maybe we need to continue doing something new and different. But then again, this is a big discussion that gets brought up all the time in terms of art creation and a career in the arts, is how often can you change gears? Can you change your style, approach, whatever, and still be successful? Especially if you have an established fan base, what happens when you try something very different and all of a sudden the people who were only there because they liked a particular style, not the experimentation, just bail? Gosh, this happens with basically every band or musical artist you can think of. I guess Bob Dylan going electric is a very famous example in 20th century pop culture. But it happens all the time. Painters, art, visual artists, filmmakers will change style sometimes. sometimes. Whether it's worth it is ultimately up to each individual person or group of persons. If your main priority in making your things is to be financially successful, financially stable, if you want to please a fan base, then experimentation is almost always the enemy. But if your priority is to explore new opportunities, try to communicate in a new way of some kind, to adapt your work to fit sort of contemporary society or even future-proof it in some sense, then subverting expectations, then experimenting is a positive. I don't know, it seems kind of silly almost to just talk about video game marketing in this way. It's not something that keeps me awake at night. I have lots of other things doing that work for me. I just think it's kind of an interesting jumping off point for this concept in general. And I think that's sort of the key point, is that it comes down to the priorities. It comes down to the priorities of each individual or group. Only certain priorities line up with consistent experimentation and subversion. And personally, I kind of find it disappointing when some group subverts successfully, and I get the impression that that's something very important to them, and then they just stick with the successful thing forever. Why should I come back? Like, why? What is supposed to keep me around from that point on? You know, if my preferences, my priorities don't line up with theirs, and I'm not getting the originality, the newness, shrug. And you know what? This leads to one thing that I've mentioned in quite a few videos talking about specific movies and shows and stuff. It's a very common complaint that the big giant Hollywood studios have homogenized the theatrical release movies to a massive degree. The Disney conglomerate with the Marvel stuff and then Star Wars following suit, a lot of their output is feeling incredibly samey. We've seen other studios try to mimic the same tone and vibe and dialogue of a lot of those movies, and we hear people criticize that stuff. We hear critics talk about, like, you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. You can't just keep using the same properties and reboots and remakes till the end of time. Like, at some point there needs to be originality, and of course that can be debated as well. Maybe some people don't mind if we continue to get reboots and remakes and stuff of recognizable IPs. A lot of people seem to want change. They want originality. However, from a business perspective, and you know, making massive movies like that are ultimately business projects. They are financial investments, and risk is scary to an investor. I get that from a more cynical perspective. However, most of the time, even in the case of something like the Marvel movies, experimentation, even if only slight experimentation, slight subversion, resulted in massive success. Like, that's how the next big thing comes along. You have to look for it. And if you don't, you'll just be imitating and keep plugging in the same formula and hope that it will continue to pay off until the cows come home. And it probably won't. Eventually, people do get tired of seeing the same old thing. It really does take a certain amount of courage. Wow, that sounds so lame, but I think it's true. It takes a certain amount of courage and willingness to accept risk to try to find something new, to try to make something original, because it could absolutely fail. But if there's no looking for the next thing, diminishing returns, right? Like, it will not keep paying off. And I don't know, I guess I'm just putting up a little flag in Devolver Digital's direction. It's starting to feel stale, and that's when you kind of start getting nervous, right? That's when you kind of start to think, uh-oh, maybe this is heading downhill. It's certainly no longer hip. Can't stay hip forever by just doing the same thing every day of your life. The monitor just fell, and the recording kept going, so maybe I'll keep that audio in. But honestly, that's it. It does keep coming up. And for some reason, this little Devolver video happens to be the thing that sort of tipped me over and you know, made me think this actually is worth talking about. And based on someone's output in relation to sameness, homogeneity versus subversion and experimentation, I do think it can tell you something about their priorities and like their ultimate goals. Please tell me what you think. Have you even heard of this Devolver thing? Do you know what I'm talking about at all? And were you also incredibly underwhelmed by that Starfield footage that just looks like more Fallout? Let me know. I hope everyone's doing well. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.